I came home for Thanksgiving to escape my boss, but the moment I stepped through the door, I froze, because there he was, Max, standing in my parents' living room, smiling like nothing happened. Let's start from the beginning. I've always thought the concept of a holiday miracle was a nice, sentimental notion for people who didn't have to share an office with Max Pierce. For me, miracles were finishing a report before he could critique it, or winning a 5-minute argument about marketing demographics in under 10. Max was a fortress of calm, a man who could dismantle your entire proposal with a single silent raise of his eyebrow. He was all sharp lines and calculated thoughts, a blizzard in a tailored suit. I, on the other hand, was a summer storm, all passion and messy ideas and stubborn determination. Our coworkers called us an aggressive weather report, fire and ice with zero chance of peace. I called it a professional nightmare. So when I finally closed my laptop for Thanksgiving break, the relief was a physical weight lifted from my shoulders. A 6-hour drive, my mother's famous apple pie, and a full week without the infuriating presence of Max Pierce. It was my own personal heaven. I sang along to the radio the whole drive, the autumn landscape a blur of gold and crimson. I didn't think about him once. I walked through my parents' front door expecting the scent of pine and roasting turkey, the familiar, comforting chaos of home. Instead, I heard his voice. It was smooth, deep, and cut through the warm chatter of my family like a shard of ice. I froze in the doorway, my duffel bag slipping from my shoulder and thudding onto the welcome mat. And there he was, standing by the fireplace, a glass of wine in his hand, looking as out of place as a shark in a goldfish bowl. His eyes met mine, and for a breathtaking second, the unflappable Max Pierce looked utterly, completely stunned. His mask of cool composure cracked, revealing pure, unadulterated shock. "Haley, sweetie, you remember the Pierces?" My mom chirped, oblivious to the seismic shift happening in her foyer. Max flew in from Chicago. His parents are on that cruise I told you about, so we insisted he join us. My smile felt brittle, like glass about to splinter. "Of course," I managed, my voice strangely tight. "What a surprise." The first dinner was a special kind of torture. Seated directly across from him, I was subjected to the full force of my family's charm offensive. My father asked him about market trends, and Max the trader was charming. He laughed at my dad's bad jokes, helped my mom clear the plates, and spoke with a warmth I'd never seen in the office. It was disorienting. This wasn't the man who sent back my presentation slides with terse, red-inked comments. This was a stranger, and I hated him even more for it. The next 2 days were a slow, simmering burn of forced proximity and accidental contact. Our world, which had been the sterile, defined space of the office, had collapsed into the intimate chaos of my childhood home. We brushed past each other in the narrow kitchen hallway, the friction of our sleeves sending a jolt straight to my core. I'd reach for a bowl in a high cabinet, and he'd be there, his height easily granting him access, his body a solid, warm wall behind me for a fleeting second. I bumped his shoulder while setting the Thanksgiving table, and instead of a curt apology, my hand lingered on his arm for a moment too long, feeling the solid muscle beneath his clothes. The most unnerving moment came when I was playing a board game with my young cousins. I was lost in their laughter, being silly, completely myself. When I looked up, I caught him watching me from the doorway. His gaze wasn't critical or cold, it was intense, curious, almost soft. But the moment our eyes locked, he looked away, a faint flush creeping up his neck, as if I'd caught him stealing a secret. The tension became a living thing, a third presence in the house that followed us from room to room. It was in the lingering glances over the breakfast table, the way our silence in a room felt louder than any argument we'd ever had. We were a powder keg, and Thanksgiving night lit the fuse. After everyone had retired, full of turkey and contentment, I crept downstairs for a glass of water. The house was dark and quiet, save for the soft ticking of the grandfather clock, and there he was, in the dim hallway outside the guest rooms, leaning against the wall as if he'd been standing there for hours, waiting. The moonlight from a nearby window cut across his face, highlighting the sharp line of his jaw. We didn't speak. The air was too thick for words. One look, a raw, heated, helpless look, and every argument, every moment of friction, every denied attraction between us crystallized into this single, inevitable point. The space between us vanished. He moved first, his hand cupping the back of my neck, pulling me into him. My back met the wall with a soft thud, and then his body was against mine, aligning perfectly, as if we were two halves of a lock finally clicking together. His kiss was not what I expected. It wasn't gentle or questioning. It was desperate and claiming, a slow burn turned into a consuming wildfire. It was the release of every challenge, every stolen glance, every suppressed thought I'd ever had about him. My hands fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer, and a low sound escaped his throat, a vibration I felt deep within myself. This was not a truce. This was a surrender. We didn't make it to his guest room. We stumbled into mine, a space frozen in my teenage years, now the backdrop for something profoundly adult. Pressed against my old bedroom door, his mouth on my neck, his hand sliding under my shirt, the world narrowed to the space between us. There was whispered laughter as we tripped over a stray shoe, and a reverence in his touch as he explored me as if he were memorizing a map he'd been trying to read for years. It was frantic and tender, forbidden and intoxicating. For a few hours, the fire and ice didn't clash. They merged into something steamier, something that felt dangerously like understanding. But reality, like the dawn, is relentless. The first gray light of Friday morning began to creep through the blinds, painting stripes across the rumpled sheets. I was curled against his side, my head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, feeling a peace I hadn't known was possible. Then I felt him shift. His body tensed. I looked up to see his expression changing, the warmth in his eyes cooling and solidifying back into that familiar, professional mask. The fortress walls were going back up, brick by brick. He sat up, the distance between us suddenly feeling like a chasm. He turned to me, his hand coming up to gently brush his thumb over my kiss-swollen lip. The touch was tender, but his words were like shards of glass. "This," he whispered, his voice low and final, "was fun. But it ends when we get back to Chicago. We can't be this at work." The sting was immediate and brutal, a cold shock that stole my breath. Fun? It was the most inadequate word in the English language for what had just happened. Before I could form a protest, before I could even process the ache spreading through my chest, he was up, pulling on his clothes with a quiet, devastating efficiency. He paused at the door, gave me one last unreadable look, and then he was gone. The silence he left behind was deafening. I stared at the empty doorway, the scent of him still on my sheets, the memory of his touch seared into my skin. The fire was out, and all that was left was the cold, hard ice of the morning after. Chicago greeted us with a slap of cold wind and an even colder silence. The return to the office was a study in brutal, self-imposed discipline. Max didn't speak to me unless it was strictly, clinically work-related. His emails were stripped of any pleasantry, his comments and meetings reduced to monosyllabic approvals or dismissals. He avoided my gaze with a focus that was almost more telling than a stare. In the break room, he stood on the opposite side as if proximity alone could erase the memory of our bodies tangled together in the dark. I forced myself to mirror him. I became a masterpiece of professional detachment. I spoke in calm, measured tones. I kept my expressions neutral. I curated a distance so vast you could sail a ship across it. But inside, I was a live wire. Every time he walked into a room, my skin prickled with the ghost of his hands on my waist. The low timbre of his voice in a meeting sent a shiver down my spine, a direct echo of his whispers against my neck. The scent of his cologne, something clean and sharp, was a torture device that turned the sterile office air into something intimate and suffocating. And it wasn't just me. Max was unraveling, slowly, quietly, completely. The first crack appeared during a weekly review. He was standing behind me, looking over my shoulder at my monitor, his body a careful, rigid inch from mine. As I scrolled through a presentation, my hand brushed the mouse and his breath hitched, a tiny, almost imperceptible sound. He didn't move away. He lingered, his heat seeping through the back of my chair, for 3 breaths too long before he abruptly stepped back and muttered a curt, "Proceed." The second crack was more visible. David from accounting leaned over my desk one afternoon to point out a figure, his hand resting amiably near my elbow. From my periphery, I saw Max freeze mid-stride. His knuckles went white around the folder he was carrying, and his jaw tightened. He didn't say a word, but the look he shot David was so possessively sharp it could have drawn blood. He flinched at the casual proximity, a physical reaction he couldn't control. The third crack shattered the illusion entirely. It was a Friday. Sarah from marketing told a ridiculous joke, and I laughed. a real, unguarded, full-throated laugh that echoed through the open-plan office. My head fell back, and the sound was pure, joyful noise. I caught Max's eye across the room. He was staring, his professional mask completely gone, replaced by a raw, aching hunger. His jaw was so tight I thought it might crack. He looked like a man watching a feast from behind a pane of glass, starving. He physically couldn't stand it. He turned and walked away, his retreat a silent confession. By the third week, Max stopped pretending he was unaffected. The control he wore like a second skin began to fray at the edges. He started slipping. A stare that lasted a beat too long, burning into the side of my face until I had to turn and meet it. A compliment on a project report that sounded too warm, too personal. "This is exceptional work, Haley," he'd said, and my name on his lips felt like a caress. Once, leaning over to correct a typo on a document I was holding, his breath ghosted my ear, and he whispered, "Right there!" And the two words were so laden with memory and intimacy, I nearly dropped the papers. I could see the war in his eyes every day. He was a man divided, his mind chanting a mantra of professional, 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 while his body, his soul, screamed for surrender. Every day he saw me in the office, the same woman he'd kissed against a hallway wall, the same woman who tasted like cinnamon pie and midnight courage, was another chisel strike against his crumbling restraint. The breaking point came on a rainy Thursday. We were the last two left, the office bathed in the quiet hum of the servers and the soft rhythmic patter of rain against the windows. The city lights below were smeared into glowing orbs by the water on the glass. I was at my desk, gathering my things, feeling the peculiar emptiness of the silent floor. I felt him before I saw him. A shift in the air, a presence at my back. I can't do this anymore. His voice was low, rough, stripped bare of all pretense. It was a voice frayed by weeks of frustration and a desire so deep it had become a physical ache. I turned slowly. The expression in his eyes was the same one he'd had the night he first kissed me in my parents' house. Hungry, conflicted, completely and utterly undone. The ice was gone, melted into a turbulent, desperate sea. He closed the distance between us in 3 swift, decisive steps. The air crackled. He didn't touch me at first, just stood there, his gaze tracing my face as if committing it to memory. I told myself it had to end. He murmured, his voice breaking. His fingers came up, trembling slightly, to brush a stray lock of hair from my cheek. The touch was electric. I built these walls, these rules, and you just exist. You smile at someone across the room, you breathe, you walk past my office, and I lose my mind just a little more. I can't think. I can't focus. All I see is you. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The weeks of tension, of silent longing, of stolen glances had said everything words couldn't. When I leaned into him, a silent, final surrender, he let out a shuddering breath and closed the distance. His kiss wasn't gentle. It was a claiming, a release, a confession. It was the weeks of restraint snapping all at once. His arms wrapped around me, pulling me flush against him, one hand tangling in my hair, the other splayed against the small of my back. A stack of papers scattered from my desk, fluttering to the floor like fallen leaves. My jacket slipped from the chair, forgotten. Suddenly, we weren't in a cold office in Chicago. We were back in our own world, the world we had created in the shadows, a world of fire and understanding and desperate, hungry truth. When we finally broke apart, breathless and trembling, he didn't pull away. He didn't say, "This ends." He held my face in his hands, his thumbs stroking my cheeks, his forehead pressed to mine. His breath was ragged, his body shaking against me. "Haley," he whispered, his voice soft and breaking, filled with a vulnerability I'd never heard from him before. "If you want this, if you want me, I'm done. I'm done pretending I don't. I'm done fighting this." I looked up at him, at the storm in his eyes, at the man who had finally stopped running. A smile bloomed on my face, the slow, warm, radiant kind that felt like coming home, like Thanksgiving warmth all over again. "I want this," I whispered, my voice steady and sure. "I want you." A profound relief washed over his features, smoothing the lines of tension, softening the hard set of his jaw. For the first time, Max didn't fight it. He didn't build a wall. He leaned in and kissed me again, deeply, sweetly, undeniably, sealing the decision he should have made weeks ago. It was a kiss of promise, of a beginning. We walked out of the office that night, hand in hand, our footsteps echoing in the empty corridor. We didn't leave as enemies or as wary coworkers balancing on a knife's edge of tension. We left as two people who had finally, blessedly, stopped running from what had always been inevitable. Our ending wasn't really an ending at all. It was simple, sweet, and steady, the kind of love that starts with a spark in the most unexpected place and grows day by day into a constant, warming flame. It was holiday magic stubbornly refusing to fade. It was fire finally melting ice, and it was the quiet, unshakable promise of something worth breaking all the rules for.